The orbital station, called Nexus Prime, floated above the neutral world of Varath like a silver ring catching starlight. It was enormous, large enough to hold 10,000 beings from over 200 different species, and every cycle it played host to the most important event in the galaxy, the Trials of Supremacy, a series of physical and combat challenges that decided which species would lead the military council for the coming year. It was not a polite ceremony. It was a bloody contest, and everyone in the galaxy took it very seriously. For 39 consecutive cycles, one species had stood above all others, the Draven. They were reptilian creatures that stood nearly 9 feet tall, covered in obsidian black scales that were harder than most ship hull alloys. Their claws could shear through reinforced steel. Their muscles could crush stone. So they moved with the terrifying grace of apex predators who had never once doubted their place at the top of the food chain. Their champion was a legendary fighter named Vor Talesh. He had not lost a single round in over a decade. His name was spoken with fear and reverence across 100 star systems. He had killed 3 opponents inside the arena, all within the rules, and had never once been knocked off his feet. And he stood at the center of every gathering like a monument carved from black glass, and the other species gave him a wide and respectful distance. But Vor was not the only dangerous being at the summit. The Valori were an insectoid species with crystalline exoskeletons and reflexes so fast that most other species could not even see their strikes. Their champion, Zith Vareen, could move faster than thought, her blows landing in the spaces between heartbeats. She had come close to beating Vor once, 3 cycles ago, before he caught her mid-attack and threw her across the arena hard enough to crack the stone floor beneath her body. The Gorvathi were massive slug-like creatures encased in bio-organic armor that could regenerate from almost any wound. Their champion, Bren, simply absorbed punishment until his opponent ran out of energy, then crushed them under his immense weight. The Thasari were tall, elegant beings who could manipulate localized gravity fields through biological implants in their spines. Their champion, Lyrith Kos, could pin an enemy to the ground or send them floating helplessly into the air. She fought like a dancer and killed like a predator. These were the species that mattered. These were the powers that shaped the galaxy. So when the human delegation arrived, almost nobody noticed. Humanity had been part of the coalition for only 6 standard cycles. At their homeworld, a violent, unstable, storm-battered planet called Earth had been classified as a Category 7 death world. Most species associated that classification with nightmare ecosystems, where nothing intelligent could possibly survive. The fact that humans had not only survived there, but had built civilizations and eventually reached the stars was considered a strange curiosity that the coalition's scientists still could not fully explain. So 5 humans walked through the grand hall in simple gray uniforms. At the front was Captain Sam Hollis, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a calm, weathered face and short, dark hair. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen enough trouble to know that most problems could be handled with patience and preparation. Beside him walked Lieutenant Nora Beckett, a compact woman with sharp green eyes and a smile that never quite warmed up all the way. Now behind them came Sergeant Danny Voss, a tall and lean man with scarred knuckles and a quiet intensity that hung around him like smoke. Private First Class Katie Marsh was young, red-haired, and looked like she had just recently finished whatever training program humans put their soldiers through. Corporal Eli Grant was wiry and alert, and from the moment he entered the hall, his eyes moved from exit to exit like he was memorizing escape routes. They had not come to compete, and humanity had never entered the trials. They were there as observers, a polite invitation extended to newer species so they could watch the event and learn about the true power structure of the galaxy. The Draven ambassador, a political officer named Sarath Vone, spotted them from across the hall. He was enormous, towering over Sam by nearly 3 feet, his polished black scales reflecting the light as he approached. "Captain Hollis," Serath said, and his translator turning his deep rumble into flat English. "Welcome to the trials. I trust your species will find the experience educational." Sam looked up at the massive reptilian without any sign of fear. "We appreciate the hospitality, Ambassador. We are looking forward to it." Serath lowered his voice, though it was still loud enough for nearby delegates to hear. "You should know that several coalition members have suggested your species enter a champion this cycle. A symbolic gesture. No one would expect a Deathworlder to last more than a few moments against a trained Draven warrior, but it would show good faith." Nora glanced at Sam. Danny shifted his weight, just slightly. Sam smiled politely. "We will take that under advisement." Serath seemed satisfied with this answer. He dipped his enormous head once and moved on. That evening, in the modest quarters assigned to the human delegation, Sam sat on the edge of his bunk and looked at his team. They want us to put someone in the ring," he said. "I heard," Nora replied. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. "They think it would be cute, something funny for the crowd before the real fights start." Danny Voss sat quietly on his bunk and said nothing. He was wrapping tape around his knuckles with slow, practiced movements. Katie Marsh had been studying holographic footage of previous trials on a small display. She looked up with wide eyes. "These guys are big. I can fast, and some of them can literally control gravity." "Yeah," Eli Grant said from the corner where he was checking the seals on his boots. "But have any of them ever done a Tuesday?" The room went quiet for a moment. Then Nora let out a short laugh through her nose. "He has a point," she said. Sam looked at each of them in turn. His gaze settled on Danny, who met his eyes without expression and gave a single, slow nod. Sam reached for his communicator and opened a channel to the Coalition's registration office. "This is Captain Sam Hollis of the Earth Delegation. We would like to register a champion for the Trials of Supremacy." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Acknowledged, Captain. And who will be representing humanity?" Sam kept his eyes on Danny. "Sergeant Daniel Voss, United States Marine Corps." Danny pulled the tape tight around his knuckles with his teeth. He flexed his fingers once. "We're testing the wrap," and then he lay back on his bunk and closed his eyes. Nobody in that room said anything more. They did not need to. They all knew what was coming. Not the specifics, not the details, but the general shape of it. They had all been through enough hard days to understand what it meant to walk into a room full of beings who thought you were nothing and show them something they were not ready to see. Somewhere on the station, Vor Talesh was sharpening his claws. Somewhere else, Azith Vareen was running drills at speeds that would blur on a camera. The greatest warriors in the galaxy were preparing for another routine cycle of dominance. None of them knew that the most dangerous thing on Nexus Prime had just finished wrapping his hands and gone to sleep. The news that a human had registered for the trials spread through Nexus Prime slowly, like a small ripple in a very large pond. It was not treated as important. A few political commentators mentioned it in passing, and the Draven delegation reportedly found it amusing. When Vor Talesh himself was told, he had simply tilted his massive head to one side and said, "Good. The crowd enjoys a quick first round." The trials were 3 days away. Each champion would face escalating challenges, starting with endurance and strength tests, moving through combat rounds and ending in a final open fight where the top-ranked champions would battle until only one remained standing. The observation galleries of Nexus Prime were open to all delegates. They ran along the upper level of the station and offered a clear view down into the training facilities below. Each species had been given its own space, and separated by energy barriers that could be made see-through or solid depending on the team's preference. Most species kept their barriers solid during training. They guarded their techniques like secrets. The Draven trained behind sealed walls. The Valori did the same. The humans left their barrier completely transparent. Zith Vareen was the first to notice. She had been walking to her own training area when she passed the human section and stopped. Through the clear wall, she could see all 5 humans in their small space. What she saw made her freeze in place. Danny Voss was running, not toward anything, not away from anything, just running. He had been running, she would later learn, for over an hour without stopping. His face was red and covered in moisture that the station's sensors identified as a saline excretion called sweat. His breathing was heavy and steady, and his feet hit the ground in a punishing rhythm that never changed. Zith had seen endurance before. The Gorvathi could maintain their slow advance for days without rest. But the Gorvathi did not sweat. They did not gasp. They did not suffer. Danny Voss was clearly suffering, and he was choosing to continue anyway. She stayed and watched. After the run, Danny dropped to the ground and began lowering his body toward the floor and pressing himself back up using only his arms. Over and over. Zith counted. He did 100 without pausing. Then he flipped onto his back and began curling his torso upward toward his knees, again and again, his stomach muscles visibly tightening beneath his thin skin. Then he stood and began lifting heavy metal bars loaded with weights, pressing them above his head, lowering them and pressing them again until his arms shook and his face twisted into an expression that Zith's translator could only describe as voluntary agony. Nora Beckett joined him. Then Katie Marsh. Then Eli Grant. They all moved through the same routines, pushing themselves to visible physical limits. Their skin turned red. Their breathing became ragged. Their faces locked into expressions somewhere between pain and grim determination. Sam Hollis stood to the side with a small timing device and called out instructions. He was not gentle about it. His words, picked up faintly by the gallery's audio sensors, and included things like faster, again, you are not done, and pain is just information. Zith stood at the gallery window for 45 minutes. She was not alone. A small crowd had gathered behind her. 2 Thessari delegates whispered to each other in low voices. A Gorvathi trade official stood motionless, with all of his eyes fixed on the humans below. A group of Valori technicians had stopped on their way to a work assignment and were now recording the scene on their personal devices. Nobody spoke loudly. Nobody laughed. What they were watching was not impressive by the standards of the trials. Danny Voss could not lift as much as a Draven child. He could not run as fast as a Valori courier. His endurance was nowhere near that of a Gorvathi. By every measurable standard, his physical abilities were average at best. But what silenced the gallery was not what he could do. It was what he was willing to do to himself. He was hurting himself. On purpose. Over and over. He was pushing his body past the point of comfort, past the point of pain, and into a place that the alien translators had no clean word for. The closest thing the Valori linguists could find was something like, the place beyond breaking where the will holds the body together. And then it got worse. After the strength exercises, Sam Hollis produced a pair of padded gloves and tossed them to Nora Beckett. She pulled them on, set her feet, and began to hit Danny Voss. Not lightly. She struck him with closed fists, targeting his chest, his arms, his legs. He blocked some blows and took the rest, grunting with each impact but never stepping backward. When she paused, he reset his guard and nodded for her to keep going. Then they switched. Danny hit back. Not wildly, not with anger, but with careful precision. Each strike was placed with the kind of calm focus that came from thousands of hours of practice. Nora took the hits the same way Danny had. She winced, absorbed, and reset. They were training each other to take damage. Zith Vareen's mandibles had stopped moving. She stood perfectly still, her compound eyes processing what she was seeing at a speed that would have overwhelmed most biological minds. These creatures were not strong. They were not fast. They were not armored. They were soft and fragile, wrapped in thin skin over breakable bones, leaking fluids from every pore. And every single morning, they chose to break themselves down and build themselves back up again. Not because something was chasing them, not because they had to, because they believed it made them harder to kill. By the end of the second day of observation, the gallery above the human training area was packed full. Beings from every corner of the galaxy stood shoulder to shoulder or tentacle to tentacle, watching in silence as the 5 humans below went through their routines. The mood in the gallery was not amusement. It was not curiosity. It was something closer to the feeling that settles over a room when someone realizes that the small, quiet animal in the corner might actually be the most dangerous thing in the building. Word reached the Draven compound that evening. A junior officer reported to Kyle Drenath, the 4-armed second of the Draven delegation, that large crowds had been gathering to watch the humans train. "What are they doing that draws such attention?" Kale asked. And the junior officer hesitated, searching for the right words. "They are hurting themselves, sir. Deliberately and repeatedly. And then they practice hurting each other. And then they do it all again the next day." Kale's 4 arms shifted at his sides. His amber eyes narrowed. "I will see this for myself," he said. In the human quarters that night, the team sat together in comfortable silence. Danny was icing his shoulders. Nora was stretching out her back. Sam looked around at his people and 1,000 de Sam bao zao wa de po sao zao vao baby. Sam looked around at his people and allowed himself a small, quiet moment of pride. They were not the biggest. They were not the fastest. They were not the strongest. But they were his, and he knew exactly what they were capable of when things got hard. "Same time tomorrow," he said. "And Danny, push the gravity up. If they are watching, let us give them something to think about." Danny nodded and bit into a protein bar. Somewhere above them, 60 aliens from 12 species were still standing in the observation gallery, replaying their recordings and trying to explain to each other what they had just seen. None of them could find the right words. The translators kept offering the same inadequate phrase. The Deathworlders call it training. On the 3rd morning before the trials, the Draven finally came to watch. Kyle Drenath, the 4-armed warrior who served as second to Vor Talesh, walked into the observation gallery expecting to see something mildly entertaining. Maybe a clumsy sparring drill. Maybe some awkward weightlifting that he could laugh about with his comrades over dinner. He expected to spend 5 minutes, shake his head, and leave. What he found instead was a crowd of nearly 60 delegates from a dozen species, all standing in complete silence, staring through the transparent barrier at the 5 humans below. The humans were doing something new. Captain Sam Hollis had changed the gravity settings in their training area. The station's environmental controls allowed for localized gravity adjustments, a feature normally used to make different species more comfortable. Earth's natural gravity was already heavier than the galactic average, roughly 1.2 times the standard setting. Then Hollis had pushed the gravity plates to 2.5 times standard. Under this crushing invisible weight, where most species would have struggled simply to stand upright, Danny Voss was doing his morning workout. He ran. slower than before. His legs drove into the ground with each step like he was pushing through wet concrete. His chest heaved, veins stood out on his neck and arms like ropes pulled tight. And for 2 bright spots of red on her cheeks, for 2 bright spots of red on her cheeks. Her jaw was clenched so hard that the muscles in her temples stood out. She was visibly shaking from the effort. She did not stop either. Eli Grant had positioned himself under the weighted bar, and which now effectively weighed 2.5 times what it had the day before. He pressed it above his head once, twice. On the 3rd try, his arms buckled and the bar came down across his shoulders. He caught it on the back of his neck and let out a sound that every species in the gallery recognized instantly as pain. Then he straightened his legs and pressed it up again. Nora Beckett was hanging from a horizontal bar by her hands, pulling her entire body weight upward so her chin cleared the bar each time. In the punishing gravity, she weighed as much as a small Gorvathi juvenile would under normal conditions. After 12 repetitions, her grip failed, and she dropped to the mat below, landing hard on her back. She lay there for exactly 4 seconds. Then she got up, jumped back to the bar, and started again. Kyle Drenath watched all of this without moving. His 4 arms hung at his sides. His claws, which could cut through reinforced steel, stayed retracted. His amber eyes tracked each human with the sharp focus of a predator watching something it did not yet understand. The Thesari champion, Lyrith Koss, was also in the gallery. She stood apart from the main crowd, her long fingers laced together, her expression unreadable. The gravity was what had caught her attention. The Thesari were the galaxy's greatest experts in gravitational biology. They understood, and better than anyone else alive, what multiplied gravity did to a living body. It compressed the spine, it strained the heart, it pulled blood away from the brain and pooled it in the legs. Long exposure caused joint damage, tiny fractures in the bones, and eventually organ failure. The humans were doing this to themselves on purpose, as a warm-up. Lyrith turned to one of her aides and spoke quietly. Pull the medical profile on their species. Everything we have. Bone density, a muscle recovery rate, heart limits, all of it. The aide looked confused. Champion, they are not considered a threat in the trials. Lyrith did not look away from the window. Pull the profile. Below, Sam Hollis called the team together in a loose circle. They were breathing hard, soaked in sweat, their muscles trembling from the work. Even under 2.5 times normal gravity, they stood upright. They did not sit down. Sam spoke to them in low, measured tones. The gallery audio picked up pieces of what he said. The Draven champion has about 4 feet of reach on you, Danny. He outweighs you by roughly 600 pounds. His scales can stop small arms fire, and his reaction time is around 0.3 seconds. Danny Voss listened without any change in expression. His record is 47 wins in a row. He has killed 3 opponents in the ring, all legal. He has never been knocked down, not once. Danny nodded slowly. Had any questions? Sam asked. Yeah, Danny said. What time is the fight? The gallery rippled. It was not laughter. It was something much stranger than that. It was the sound of 60 beings from 12 different species all arriving at the same unsettling realization at the same moment. The humans were not afraid. They were not showing off. They were not pretending to be brave. They had looked at the numbers, understood exactly what they were up against. None in their response was to ask about the schedule. The fear that should have been there, the basic survival instinct that every intelligent species in the galaxy relied on to assess danger, was simply not a factor. It was not missing. It was present, but it had been set aside, stored away in some locked room in their minds where they kept things that were true but not useful. Kale Drenath left the gallery without talking to anyone. He walked straight to the Draven training compound and asked to speak with Vor Talesh. I watched the human train, Kale said. Vor was sitting on a massive stone bench, dragging a whetstone along his claws in long, slow strokes. He did not look up. And they raised their gravity to 2.5 standard and continued their exercises. Vor's claws paused on the stone for just a moment. Then he continued sharpening. Their species comes from a heavy world, and that is to be expected. They were in pain, Kale said. Real pain. Their bodies were failing under the weight, and they kept going. By choice. Vor said nothing. One of them fell from a bar, Kale continued. She hit the ground hard. She lay there for 4 seconds, and then she got up and did it again. Vor set the whetstone down. He looked at Kale with old, calculating eyes. You are telling me this because you are worried, Vor said. I am telling you this because in 30 years of warfare and competition, I have never seen any species train like that. They were not getting ready for victory. They were getting ready for pain. They were practicing how to suffer. The chamber was quiet for a long time. I will watch them myself tomorrow, Vor said at last. Kyle nodded and left. That night, back in the human quarters, Katie Marsh soaked her swollen hands in a basin of cold water. She looked across the room at Danny Voss, who was wrapping fresh tape around his knuckles with the slow, careful attention of someone performing a ritual. Do you think we actually have a chance? She asked. Danny pulled the tape tight with his teeth and flexed his fingers, testing the wrap. He looked at his hands for a moment, turning them over, studying the scars and calluses that covered them like a map of every hard thing he had ever done. I think nobody on this station has ever been punched by someone who grew up on the south side of Baltimore, he said. Katie smiled at that. Nora was lying on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, running combat scenarios in her head. Eli was cleaning his boots again, which was something he did when he was thinking. Sam was reading something on a data pad, his face giving away nothing at all. Get some sleep, Sam said without looking up. Tomorrow we show them what a Tuesday looks like. The lights dimmed in the human quarters. 5 people from Earth closed their eyes in a station full of beings who could break them in half without trying. They slept soundly. Somewhere in the Draven compound, Vor Talesh sat alone in the dark, still holding his whetstone, still thinking about what Kyle had told him. About a species that practiced suffering, about creatures made of soft skin and breakable bones who chose to crush themselves under artificial gravity every morning before breakfast. For the first time in a very long time, Vor Talesh did not sharpen his claws before sleeping. Instead, he sat in the silence and considered the possibility that strength was not only about what your body could do, it was also about what your mind refused to quit doing. It was a new thought for him, and he did not like it. The arena at the heart of Nexus Prime was a colossal amphitheater carved from the station's superstructure. It could seat over 10,000 spectators from dozens of species. The floor was a circular platform of hardened composite material, 50 meters across, ringed by energy barriers strong enough to contain almost any amount of force. Hovering drones provided holographic feeds to every corner of the station and through coalition relays and to billions of viewers across the galaxy. The opening ceremony was brief. The Grand Arbiter, an ancient Thessari named Orvan, recited the formal challenge and invited the champions forward. 16 species had entered fighters this cycle, the most in over a decade. Each champion stepped onto the arena floor when their species was called, drawing cheers, roars, clicks, and deep vibrations from their supporters in the stands. When humanity was called, Danny Voss walked out alone. He wore a plain gray compression shirt, dark tactical pants, and flat-soled boots. No armor, no visible weapons, no enhancements of any kind. Compared to the towering, armored, and biologically extraordinary beings around him, he looked like someone who had accidentally wandered into the wrong room. The arena fell into a low murmur that was not quite silence, but was very close to collective pity. The first stage of the trials was an endurance gauntlet. A sustained wave of pain stimulation, directly into the nervous system. The goal was simple: last as long as possible. Champions who fell or gave up were ranked by their time and placed into the combat brackets. The platforms activated at the same time. For the first 10 minutes, the stress was mild. All 16 champions stood comfortably. Danny stood with his hands at his sides, his breathing steady, his face blank. At 20 minutes, the gravity had reached 3 times standard. 3 champions had already dropped, a small bird-like species whose hollow bones cracked under the weight. A gaseous being whose containment suit began to fail. A silicon-based creature whose crystal body fractured under the pressure. The crowd acknowledged each elimination with polite attention and moved on. And Danny's platform was at 3 times standard gravity. He stood. His knees were bent slightly, absorbing the load through his legs the way a building absorbs wind through its frame. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. His jaw was tight. He did not move. At 40 minutes, the gravity hit 4 times standard and the heat began to climb. 2 more champions fell. Zith Vareen was vibrating slightly, her crystalline body humming under the strain, but she held. The Brendagorvathi barely seemed to notice. Vor Talesh stood like a carved statue, completely motionless, his black scales soaking up the heat without any visible effect. Danny's shirt was soaked through. His breathing had become loud enough for the arena's audio systems to pick up. A thin line of blood appeared at his nostril from the pressure building inside his head. He wiped it with the back of his hand and did not move. The crowd had gone quiet. At 50 minutes, the pain stimulus activated. It was a neural field that directly targeted the pain receptors of whatever biology stood on the platform. For most species, this was the end. This was the thing that convinced the body that no amount of pride was worth the damage being done. 3 more champions collapsed in fast succession. The arena was down to 9. Danny flinched when the pain hit. His entire body went rigid for half a second. And then he opened them. He opened them and then he opened them. He opened them and looked directly across the arena at Vor Talesh's platform. Through the haze of heat and pressure and agony, the human locked eyes with the greatest warrior in the galaxy. And he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was not a brave face put on for the cameras. And it was the smile of someone who had found that place beyond breaking, the place the Valori had tried to name, and had decided to stay there. In the stands, Kyle Drenath leaned forward. His 4 hands gripped the railing hard enough to dent the metal. At 1 hour and 10 minutes, 2 more champions fell. 7 remained. Vor Talesh, Zith Vareen, Lyrith Koss, Bren, a massive Krenari warrior named Gruul, a bio-augmented Scythian named Pelax, and Danny Voss. Danny was shaking. At a rate that the medical monitors flagged as dangerous. But he was standing. At 1 hour and 22 minutes, Gruul collapsed. At 1 hour and 31 minutes, Pelax's augmentations overloaded and he dropped. 5 remained. At 1 hour and 40 minutes, the Grand Arbiter called the endurance round. He had outlasted 11 of the galaxies, 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 11 11 of the galaxies 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 11 of the galaxies. He had outlasted 11 of the galaxy's finest warriors. He had beaten species that outweighed him 10 times over and possessed biological advantages that no human technology could replicate. When the platforms shut down, Danny's legs gave out. He dropped to one knee on the arena floor, his head bowed, the blood dripping from his nose onto the hard surface below. The arena was completely silent. Then Sam Hollis's voice came through his earpiece, calm and steady as a heartbeat. "On your feet, Marine." Danny put his hands on his knee. He pushed. His legs screamed at him. His vision narrowed to a dark tunnel with a point of light at the center. He stood up. The arena stayed silent for 3 more seconds. Then, from somewhere in the Valori section of the stands, a single sharp click rang out. Then another. Then a dozen more. Within moments, the entire Valori contingent was clicking together in unison. Danny's translator told him what it meant. It was the highest form of respect their species could offer to someone who was not one of them. The sound spread. The Thesari began a low harmonic hum. Several smaller delegations added their own sounds. The noise built and grew until it filled the arena like a living thing, like a wave that kept rising and refused to break. So the Draven section was silent. Vor Talesh stood on his platform, staring at the human below. His amber eyes were no longer bored. They were no longer amused. They were focused with the sharp intensity of a predator that had just realized it might be facing something it did not fully understand. The combat brackets were posted on a massive holographic display above the arena. 2 semi-final bouts. The winners would face each other. The overall winner would then challenge Vor Talesh, who received a pass to the final as the top-ranked finisher. Danny Voss versus Zith Vereen, Lyrith Koss versus Bren. In the human section of the stands, Katie Marsh gripped the railing. Eli Grant stood still as stone. Nora Beckett's lips were moving, though no one could hear what she was saying. Sam Hollis stood with his arms crossed, looking down at Danny on the arena floor. The smallest trace of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Now," he said quietly to no one but himself, "comes the fun part." Down on the arena floor, Danny Voss wiped the blood from his face with the back of his hand. He rolled his shoulders, felt things shift and grind inside his body that probably should not have been shifting or grinding, and turned to face the direction of the combat ring. He had survived the first test. He had earned his place among the final 5. Now he had to fight. The arena floor was cleared and reset for combat. The energy barriers were raised to full power. Medical teams from a dozen species stood ready at the edges. The rules were simple. No weapons beyond natural biology, no outside technology, no killing a surrendered opponent. Everything else was allowed. Zith Vareen stepped onto the floor with the fluid speed of a species built for combat. Her crystalline exoskeleton caught the arena lights and scattered them into tiny rainbows as she moved. Her compound eyes tracked Danny with the processing power of a biological supercomputer. She was faster than him. She was more agile. Her strikes could crack stone. By every measurement that mattered, she should have ended the fight in seconds. Danny walked to his mark and settled into a stance that no alien in the arena recognized. His weight was balanced on the balls of his feet. His hands were up, loose but ready, elbows tucked against his ribs. His chin was down. His eyes were level. It was a boxing stance, modified for a shorter fighter facing a faster opponent, on something refined over centuries of humans hitting each other for sport and survival. The arbiter signaled the start. Zith moved first. She crossed the distance between them in a blur, her right forelimb striking toward Danny's throat with enough force to crush bone. Danny slipped to the left. The strike passed his ear close enough to move his hair. He had not tried to block it or match her speed. He had simply read the angle of her body and moved before the strike was fully committed. The crowd reacted with a sharp collective gasp. Zith struck again, 4 blows in under a second, targeting his head, his chest, and his legs. Danny blocked the first on his forearm, feeling the bone rattle from the impact. He dodged the second. The third caught him across the ribs, and the crack was audible across the arena. The fourth missed as he pivoted and circled away. He had broken ribs now, maybe 2. He kept moving. Danny reset his stance. Zith came again, faster this time, in a storm of angular strikes that pushed Danny backward across the floor. He blocked what he could and absorbed what he could not. Each hit painted a new bruise across his body. He was losing. Anyone could see that. He was slower, weaker, and softer than his opponent. Every exchange left him more damaged while she stayed untouched. But he was learning. By the third exchange, he had mapped her patterns. Zith was devastatingly fast, but she was also predictable. She had been trained in a formal system that followed logical sequences. Each combination had a rhythm. Each rhythm had a gap. On her next attack, Danny did something nobody expected. Instead of backing away from her opening strike, he stepped into it. He took her lead blow on his left shoulder, a hit that dislocated the joint with a sickening pop, and in the fraction of a second that her arm was extended and committed, he drove his right fist into the junction between her chest and abdomen, where her crystalline armor was thinnest. It was not a beautiful punch. It was short, brutal, and compact, delivered with every pound of a body that had been built on a planet where the gravity never let up, and the things that wanted to kill you never stopped coming. Zith Vareen staggered. For the first time in her competitive career, she staggered. The arena erupted in noise. Danny's left arm hung useless at his side. Blood ran from a cut above his eye. His broken ribs shifted with every breath. By any medical standard, he should not have been fighting. He raised his right hand and beckoned her forward. Something changed in Zith after that. There was a tiny hesitation in her movements that had not been there before. She was not afraid of his strength or his speed. She was afraid of his willingness to trade damage for a chance to land a single blow. She had never faced anyone who chose to get hurt on purpose, and the fight lasted another 6 minutes. Danny took terrible punishment. His body became a list of injuries that would have stopped most beings twice his size, but he kept moving. He kept finding the gaps, and every time he hit Zith, he hit her in the same spot, that thin junction in her armor, stacking the damage with each strike. At the 8-minute mark, Zith threw a lunging strike meant to finish the fight. Danny had been waiting for it. He had been leaving the opening on purpose, or inviting exactly that attack. He dropped under her swing, turned on his heel, and drove his fist upward into the weakened section of her armor with everything he had left. Something cracked. Not in Danny. In Zith. She folded. Her legs gave out and she went down on one knee. The crack in her armor spread in a web of fracture lines across her body. She tried to rise and could not. The arbiter called the bout. Danny Voss had won. He stood over his fallen opponent, swaying on his feet. Then he did something that confused every non-human in the arena. He bowed to her. A short, respectful dip of his battered head. Zith stared up at him, and after a long moment, she lowered her own head in return. The second semifinal was shorter. Lyrith Koss used her gravity powers to pin Bren to the floor and took him apart over 20 patient minutes. She advanced to face Danny. Danny's medical team, which was Nora Beckett with a first aid kit and a roll of tape, had 45 minutes to patch him up. They popped his shoulder back in. They taped his ribs. They closed the cut above his eye. They gave him water and a nutrition bar. "Can you fight?" Sam asked. Danny rotated his shoulder, winced hard, and nodded. The fight against Lyrith was different. She did not come close. She stood at the far side of the arena and bent gravity around Danny like a puppeteer pulling strings. His weight doubled, then tripled. He was pulled left, then shoved right. The Deathworlder advanced. At 5 meters, the Deathworlder advanced. At 5 meters away, Lyrith concentrated all her power into a single pulse aimed at slamming him flat. The floor cracked beneath his knee. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning them red. And then, in the moment her ability needed a fraction of a second to recharge, but Danny surged forward. He covered the distance in 2 lunging steps and tackled her to the ground. On the ground, gravity manipulation was less effective. Danny's close-range fighting was brutal and efficient. He secured a hold around her body, controlled her long limbs, and applied choking pressure to the nerve cluster at the base of her skull that his team had identified from her species' public medical files. Lyrith tapped the floor twice. Surrender. Danny released her and collapsed onto his back, staring up at the ceiling, breathing in ragged gasps. The final match was set. Danny Voss versus Vor Talesh. The Draven champion walked onto the arena floor and, for the first time anyone could remember, studied his opponent with something other than boredom. "You are injured," Vor said. Danny looked up at the 9-foot wall of black scales and muscle. "I have been worse." What followed was not a fight in the normal sense, and it was a collision between 2 ideas about what it meant to be a warrior. Vor was everything his reputation promised. Impossibly strong, terrifyingly fast, and his scales turned Danny's punches aside like they were nothing. His first real blow sent Danny skidding across the floor. His second cratered the ground where Danny had been standing a moment before. But Danny found something on the 4th exchange. Vor's scales covered everything except the inside of his throat. And when the Draven opened his jaws to roar before a killing strike, as he always did, that soft tissue was exposed for a fraction of a second. Danny stopped retreating. The next time Vor charged, Danny walked straight into him. He took a blow to the side that cracked more ribs. He took another hit to his leg that buckled his knee. But when Vor opened his jaws for the finishing blow, Danny stepped inside the giant's reach and drove his fist into his throat. He staggered back, claws going to his. He staggered back, claws going to his throat, amber eyes wide with shock. Danny pressed forward, striking the same spot again and again. Vor swung wildly. A claw raked across Danny's back, opening 3 deep gashes. Another blow caught his broken ribs. Danny felt something deep inside his body give way, a shift that meant serious damage. He did not stop. On his final strike, Danny put everything into a single uppercut aimed under Vor's jaw. It connected with a sound like a hammer hitting stone. Vor's head snapped back. His massive body swayed on the edge of falling. Then Vor steadied himself. His hand shot out and closed around Danny's throat. He lifted the human off the ground like he weighed nothing and held him at arm's length. The arena held its breath. Danny's one working hand came up and gripped Vor's wrist. Not to pry it away. That would have been impossible, just to hold on. His eyes were open, clear, focused, unbroken. Through swollen, split lips, he said two words that his translator rendered in perfect Draven. "Not done." Vor held him for 3 more seconds. Then, slowly, he lowered Danny to the ground and released his throat. The Draven champion stepped back and placed his fist over the center of his chest, the warrior's salute. A gesture reserved only for those considered equals. "I have fought 1,000 battles," Vor said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "I have defeated champions of every species, but I have never faced anything like you. You are slow, you are fragile, you are small, and you are the most dangerous thing I have ever seen in this ring. Because you do not fight to win. You fight to refuse losing. And I do not know how to beat something that does not know when it is beaten." The fight resumed, and Vor won. His advantages in size and strength were simply too great. The final blow was measured and controlled, delivered with the precision of a warrior who honored his opponent. Danny did not get up from that one, but it did not matter. Every being in that arena understood what they had witnessed. A creature from a death world, soft-skinned and breakable, had walked into the most dangerous arena in known space and fought the galaxy's greatest champions through nothing but training, pain tolerance, and an absolute refusal to stay down. 6 months later, the Coalition quietly changed the trial's rules. A new medical evaluation was required for all champions. The Draven, when asked about it, called it a routine update. Nobody believed them. On Earth, in a gym in Baltimore, Danny Voss finished his morning run, dried the sweat from his face, and taped his still-healing knuckles. A young Marine approached him with wide eyes. "Sergeant Voss, is it true you fought the Draven champion?" "Oh, what was it like?" Danny thought about it for a moment. "Tuesday," he said, and went back to training.